So we're going to be looking at the new CQC assessment pilots today. The plan for today is simple. Why is this happening? One of the reasons why CQC are looking at piloting a new approach to assessing adult social care services are the reports are taking too long. We spoke with someone a few weeks ago on our last webinar, and their report had taken 5 months. We've spoken to other people that it's taken 4 months, 6 months, 7 months. It's taking too long. And what CQC have stated is the reason it's taking too long is they're scoring each individual evidence category, and that process, they believe, is holding up the publication of reports. Another issue is they're aware that the scoring was never really brilliantly articulated. I'd like to argue that we articulated it quite well in our training, but kind of on a national scale, CQC's articulation of the evidence scoring never really fully landed, and there was still quite a lot of confusion. And finally, the other reason why there are changes to the assessment process and why these pilots are being worked on is quite simply because CQC are struggling to meet their quota. They are struggling to reach the number of people that they need to see. We did a talk at the Care Show not that long ago. And one of the things we did is we reviewed the number of reports that have been published in the last 4 months. So over a 4-month period, I believe there are 192 home care reports. And when you did the maths and then you extrapolated how many they'd done each month and then how many home care agencies there actually are, the maths meant that to get all services assessed, it would take 20.8 years, which obviously is not possible. So clearly, to get the job done, CQC have recognised that things in their new assessment approach need to change. So it's time for a new approach. Again, now, before you start panicking and deleting everything you've done so far and burning your Get CQC Ready training and all the other stuff that you've done, we are not talking about a complete rework. We are not talking about a complete rewrite. We are not talking about chucking it in the bin and starting again. Fundamentally, this comes directly from an email from a CQC inspector that is involved in the pilot. The inspection itself is the same, but how we record the information within our system and the way the report is presented is different. So you still have the evidence categories, we still have the quality statements, but what is changing is the way in which CQC make a judgment about a service and the process that goes through. As you may remember, in the previous framework, they would score each evidence category. So you might have something like kindness, compassion, and dignity is the quality statement. And then you might have, people's experience, that's one score. And then feedback from staff leaders, that's another score. And then processes, that's another score. That is one of the major things they're moving away from, scoring at the evidence level. They still want to score at quality statement level, but not scoring at individual evidence category level. Here's what the new pilot approach is looking to test. A new approach to both the way in which reports are written and looking in particular at how that scoring, how we move towards a professional judgment approach. Now, much of what we're looking at today comes from some of our clients who are involved in the pilot process and have shared some of their experiences and have shared, in particular, emails from inspectors that have outlined the process to them. If you get asked to be inspected in the next weeks, months, it is highly likely, though not guaranteed, that they will make a request to use this new approach, moving away from scoring the evidence categories. Now, the extent to which they are actually asking you, as ever, is open to interpretation. It might be one of those things where we're asking you, but really this is the only option. If you get a chance to be assessed in the new approach, I would say certainly take it, but keep your eyes open. And we'll talk about some of the things to watch out for if you get assessed under the new approach. So one of the main things, we'll break down 3 or 4 key things about this new approach to how CQC are going to assess and rate and score you. A return to professional judgment. Obviously, professional judgment has always been a key hallmark, but what we had in the old new framework, is that the phrase? In the early new framework, or the first version of the new framework, was we had these scores by evidence category, and CQC would give a score for people's experiences, feedback from staff and leaders, and that would then create the maths of that would create your quality statement. So 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3 divided by the 4, you've got a 3, you're now good for that quality statement. CQC are moving away from that and looking to return to professional judgment. Here's a few quotes directly from CQC. During the interim approach, we will be scoring at quality statement level, not evidence category level. This interim assessment pilot will be carried out using an updated CQC process whereby professional judgment will be used to determine quality statement scores. This involves assessment teams reviewing sufficient evidence to review a complete quality statement, i.e. all the evidence categories, and recording this in our system using a single evidence category. So the evidence categories still exist: people's experiences, feedback from staff and leaders, processes, observations. They're still collecting that data. They're still requesting that data as part of their assessment. But instead of giving a score for each individual one, they will take all of that information. They will receive all of that information, whether it's the stuff they've gained during the in-person visit, whether it's the stuff they've gained during the extra time outside of the visit. They will process all of that and they will make a judgment for that quality statement based on the evidence they receive, rather than scoring the different evidence categories. So the evidence categories are still in place, the evidence categories are still being used, the evidence categories are still being requested, but they're not being individually scored. Instead, the inspector is making a professional judgment based on what they are receiving, which then creates the quality statement score. Now, there are some questions around this, which is, to what extent are we moving back to kind of the inspector and the subjective element? Really, it's a bit of a two-way street. I always quite like the evidence category scoring, because what I liked is that at the end of the day, the maths got you your score rather than the assessor kind of having a vibe, having a feel. So if they gave you a 3, a 3, a 2, and a 4, the numbers gave you a quality statement score. They're essentially moving away from that back to the inspector reviewing that evidence and then coming up with the score themselves. And I think in some ways there is something that we lose about this process by going back to that. Equally, I understand their point that, if this scoring at this granular level is causing reports to take 5-6 months, then clearly something needs to be done about it. We can have some discussion later on about whether it's the right fit, but that is what they're currently piloting. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, doesn't mean it's going to come out exactly like this universally, but these pilots are happening. They are happening in real time now. CQC are not waiting or, maybe after Christmas we'll have a look. They are piloting this as we speak. A little bit of an explanation around the professional judgment, and also looking at how the report is structured. And we'll show you some examples or some mock-ups, not examples, our mock-ups of what that might look like. So, explanation of professional judgment. The draft report will look slightly different and include text as to why we have applied professional judgment to ensure it's a complete picture and the scoring is correct. You will still have the opportunity to correct any factual inaccuracies in the report. So it's going to impact the way that the reports themselves are structured and what's written in them. Also, it's going to mean that you still have the factual inaccuracy process. However, and we'll see this in a moment, the actual amount of information in your report will be less. That is because of the way the reports are being structured. Under the old reports, what you often saw, not all the time, but you'd have the scores for each quality statement, which you'll still have, but then you'd have a little write-up around each evidence category. Now, because they're moving away from scoring each evidence category separately, you won't have the same kind of detail underneath each of the quality statements. Here is what the report structure is kind of explained as by CQC. The report will also look slightly different from other reports published under the single assessment framework. The evidence to support the overall rating, and don't worry, I will show you a visual of this in a moment. The evidence to support the overall rating will be summarised at the start of each key question. Bear in mind, key question, I know you know all this, but I'm just making it clear. Safe, effective, caring, responsive, well-led. So at the beginning of each key question, there will be kind of a description of the evidence that's been seen. There will then be short judgment statements that align with the scoring under each of the quality statements. So what we're moving away from, or what we're moving to, sorry, is we're looking at having a kind of an overview at the top of the key question of the evidence that's been looked at, and then short statements that align with the overall quality statement score. So if it's got a 3, then the statements underneath that quality statement will probably be about the fact that it's good. If the quality statement's a 2, it's going to be kind of written in more of an RI kind of setup. Now, what I'm about to show you is a mock-up from my head. So please don't look at what I've just written and gone, this is the word, this is how it's going to be. But looking at what they have written here about how these reports can be structured, this is a suggested mock-up of what that text might, emphasis on the word might, please don't sue me, might look like. So here we have an example of the caring key question. Now, notice what they'd said previously. The report will look different. The evidence to support the overall rating will be summarised at the start of each key question. So here, again, ignore the fact that it doesn't actually look like a CQC report because I've made it in PowerPoint. But we can see here we've got the caring key question, and there's a description of the evidence. So I've written here, again, I'm sure we've got some current or certainly previous CQC inspectors on the talk who will absolutely annihilate me for my impersonation of a CQC inspector, but it's just for illustrative purposes. For the caring key question, we spoke with 6 residents and 4 families. We also had conversations with 8 staff members and received emails from a further 4 respondents. We reviewed the services survey feedback, which was ran by an independent company. Got to get myself in there. We also reviewed the services wellbeing policies, as well as their policies and practices around providing dignified personal care and people's care plans. So that is my mock-up of that kind of descriptive bit that says, look, this is what we looked at as part of the caring key question. What we then get is we get the quality statements, and you'll notice that as they have stated, you'll have the quality statement score and then a brief, short judgment statement. So if you look at the current single assessment framework reports, the bits under each quality statement are actually quite long. Sometimes they can be as long as 4 or 5 paragraphs. Typically, it's around the 2 or 3 paragraphs. CQC are making a conscious shift to go, actually, we are not going to write in that detail. Instead, we are going to provide short judgment statements that align with the scoring. So our example here, you've got kindness, compassion, and dignity, which is a 3. And they've just, in their minds, have written staff treat residents with kindness, compassion, and dignity. This is recognised by residents and families who describe care variously as excellent and great. Care staff feel their well-being is supported effectively. Then treating people as individuals. Resident care plans are sufficiently tailored to the specific needs of individual residents, including their social, emotional, and mental health needs. Cultural and religious needs, as well as communication needs, are met and understood. Now, they might write something better, they might write something different. I'm not saying that what I've written here is a verbatim example. But can you see that what we are seeing here is an overview of the evidence for the key question, and then we are having short judgment statements. This is a departure from the current reports, which have a lot more content here, and they don't really have any overview of the evidence at key question level. So they're moving the evidence bit to the key question and going, this is the evidence we looked at, and then they're writing these kind of short judgment statements for each quality statement. What does this mean for you? What does this mean for your life? What does this mean for your next inspection? A few things that we want to raise. They are streamlining the reporting process. Now, call me a cynic, but we did a big piece of work several years ago now, actually, looking at the themes across outstanding CQC reports. And one of the things we found was that they had sometimes the exact same sentences word for word. Whether this means that CQC can kind of have a bank of statements that they can pick between, I'm not saying that is what they're going to do, but it's certainly the fact they're moving towards short judgment statements. It creates the environment where you could almost have a drop down and go, actually, they are good at this, select. That's the statements we use. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. I'm not saying that's what they should do. But it's certainly the fact they're moving towards short judgment statements means it's easier to create processes that don't involve people hand typing prose. This will result in less depth. Now, whether that matters or not is a much wider question. What do people need from their CQC report? Do they need lots of detail? Do they need the headlines overview? That is part of a wider question. But fundamentally, reports that have short judgment statements for each quality statement means the report is going to be less in depth. It may involve more standardization around evidence collection, because CQC are now very openly stating not just what evidence category is, because we know that it's in the framework, but what specific evidence they have to kind of report. For the safe question, we looked at these evidences. So it might result in a bit more standardization. So you know that if they've looked at the home down the road and then they come to your home, you know the stuff they looked at in that home. And in theory, you'd hope they'll look at the same stuff in your home, or at least you'll know from the report what they've stated that they've looked at, which gives you, again, a bit of help in terms of inaccuracy to make sure that what they've reported matches the evidences that they've listed they've looked at. Now, I would say that there are some challenges. You know, the service's ability to scrutinise evidence is still there. So you can go, well, you didn't look at that evidence, or we gave you that evidence, but it's not listed here. However, I wonder whether you can scrutinize the assessment process. One of the things that I quite liked personally, and I'm not a service provider, so I don't want to speak on behalf of others, but something that I thought had some real value was the fact that you could see the score they gave you for people's experiences, the score they gave you for feedback from staff and leaders, and you could potentially challenge that and go, well, you've given us a score of 2 for feedback from staff and leaders. Why is you giving us an RI? What, are you sure that that's really a fair assessment of what staff have said? Here, you don't have that granular detail. So you've got this evidence they've looked at, this kind of statement about here's the evidence we've looked at, and then you've got this short sentence or two about the quality statement, and there isn't much you can dig into. Does that make sense? Apart from going, did they look at all the stuff that we sent them? There isn't a lot you can do about assessing the interpretation that they have applied. Whereas with the other granular evidence category one, you can sit there and go, why did you give us a 2 for that? Or I'm not sure why they gave us a 3 there and not a 4. So I think that's going to be something that it moves the factual accuracy back to what it is, which is factual accuracy. And it becomes harder to scrutinize the actual assessment process. What do you do if you get one of these requests? Well, as I've heard, speaking to some of our clients, it's not really a request. It's really just to let you know. I mean, you can fight it, but I don't know how well that's going to go. So if they say, look, we're doing this, we're piloting this approach, is that okay? It probably isn't an is that okay? It's more of a polite, just to let you know this is how it's going. Few things that you want to do as part of this process. Maybe externally, you may want to verbally say these to inspector. You may just want to think through them as a quality team or as a group. A few questions that you might want to think through either during or after this process. Does the report, the initial kind of draft report and, obviously later down the line, the properly published report, does the report state the evidence they used to make their judgments? We've got this kind of idea that under each key question, they're going to report on the evidence. Do they state that? Is it clear? Do those evidences match up with the evidences you sent? Because maybe, bearing in mind, you're still collecting feedback and information outside of the observation day or days. Does the information, the evidence that they state at the beginning of that key question correlate with what you have sent them and what you feel they should have taken into account? Now, it might be it's just an edit and they've forgotten to write something, or there's a very real chance that you look through that little list at the beginning of each key question and go, wait a sec, we sent them 50 surveys, or wait a sec, there were like 10 staff members they spoke to on the day. Where's that? So just make sure that the evidence list or the evidence descriptor matches what you feel they should have used. Have they received enough feedback evidence? I don't mean to go on about this, but feedback is a pretty central part of this process. Do you feel that they've spoken to to a fair number of people? If they say we spoke to 2 residents and you're in a service that has got 40 residents, 30 of which are very willing and able to communicate, they don't have perhaps needs that might hinder them from that, keep an eye on that. Make sure that the evidence is reflective and fair. A really important one, I've said this a couple of times and it makes me laugh because really this is the most important question. Is the report received more quickly? Because the reason why they're getting rid of all this other stuff and moving to this is exactly that. They want to speed up the process. They don't want people to have 5-6 months. So if they go through all of this and then it still takes you 6 months to get the report, well, then there's something else going on. So really have a very clear date, knowing, like you could forget the data inspected, but really keep track of when did this draft come through, when was the final report published, how long was it between the first meeting and them coming and that final report, what was the time between the first meeting and the draft report? Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't result in the report being received more quickly, then they've made a load of changes that haven't actually impacted the bottom line problem they're facing. So keep track of those dates and times. And then finally, I'm asking this more as a kind of a thought question rather than something that you would necessarily be able to bring. You wouldn't be able to bring this to factual accuracy, but I think it's something that when we talk about advocating for ourselves, and I've mentioned it several times, Skills for Care, NCF, there's all these great groups that sit at the table with CQC and represent us. So if the answer to some of these questions are negative, let NCF know, let Skills for Care know, let the Care Provider Alliance know, because they sit at the table with CQC and can raise it. And this is the fundamental question. Do you believe the professional judgment is accurate and replicable. Now, professional judgment, by its very definition, is the judgment of an individual professional. So it's not the same as the numbers that we had in the past, where those numbers come and create. So I'm not saying it's to be instantaneously, perfectly replicable, because humans are humans. But do you believe, in a broad sense, that what you've experienced here in terms of the professional judgment applied to the evidence sent through, do you believe that most inspectors would have come to similar conclusions? And do you believe that the process they went through is such that if Bob, the inspector, got sick the night before and Jeff, the inspector, turned up instead, that actually there wouldn't be a huge difference between the experience? Fundamentally, what we're seeing with the removal of the evidence category scorings is a move back to the more interpretive aspects. And, you know, there's always interpretation. There is no such thing as complete unbiased. Even AI, even the robots have biases, which we have seen to shocking degree, some of the stuff that AI have come out with. But do we, in a broad sense, believe that this move towards professional judgment is encouraging accurate and reasonably consistent replicable processes? That is the big concern from a provider perspective. Little thing I just want to mention, I'm not trying to publicize what we do. I just want to highlight, because some people have asked us, what does this mean for those of you that have done surveys with us and so on and so forth? What does this mean for kind of feedback collection, surveys, all that stuff? We still recommend that you keep scoring, for a very simple reason, that there's no point in having surveys that don't result in any numbers, any scores. It's also really helpful because at the end of the day, if CQC are kind of doing this in a very broad, ethereal feedback to get your quality statement scores, it's useful for you to be able to say, just so you know, we know that we've scored an average score of 3, a good in this area. That way, if CQC are kind of doing the ethereal, oh, overall for this quality statement, we give it this. If you can show that you've got some data, you've got data-driven scores around these quality statements and around these evidence categories, it helps your argument, it helps that assessor. They're not going to necessarily read it and use them directly, but what you're doing is you are creating something stronger than the interpretive layer of the inspector going, I think we're dealing with a XYZ. If you can say, look, just so you can see, our residents, our families, our staff, they've scored us a good in this area, or they've scored us a 3, they've scored us a 4. It means that there is more weight to those discussions, instead of kind of just sending them a bunch of emails, sending them a bunch of stuff and hoping that as CQC do their professional judgment, that they arrive at the right point. You are giving them data that leads them more strongly and more in a more evidence-based approach down those sorts of avenues. Again, if you do provide them anything like the feedback stuff that we've done for services or any other kind of feedback, you should expect to see that written in that first paragraph. You know, we know from the clients that we've worked with that CQC have cited and stated when they've used our evidence. So make sure that if you provide any evidence like that, whether it's feedback, whether it's testimonials, whether it's emails, expect to see it here and question if it is not. You know, if you're providing evidence to CQC and they're using professional judgment, you need the assurance that that professional judgment is based on all of the evidence that you provided. Right, we are coming up to 5 to 1. It's good to know that I've stuck to time. Next week, it's half term for a lot of people. I will be probably being jumped on and watching Trolls or some other kids film all day. So there won't be a Wednesday webinar next week. But my usual approach is when there's something worth saying, I'll bring it up. But I don't just want to do a Wednesday webinar where we go, so this is still going on. So as more things become revealed, as more things get kind of put into practice, we will have another Wednesday webinar probably in a couple of weeks' time. Most of you are probably directly connected to me, but if not, here is the information. Research at Care Research. If you want to give us an email, careresearch.co.uk is our website, and there is my lovely younger self looking back at me on the LinkedIn picture. Please do connect. If you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to raise about anything I've said today, please do. We will be putting this recording up onto YouTube probably tomorrow. I'm going to have one little look. There's some comments that were made. Just want to highlight a few things that have been raised here, a few interesting points. some people said they appreciated the use of the evidence-based scoring as they helped kind of minimize unconscious bias. The return to relying on professional judgment raises concerns about subjectivity. It's difficult to see how the assessment process can be deemed equitable and fair when individual perceptions and interpolations can vary. Consistency in evaluation is crucial, especially when assessing a performance across a diverse group of individuals. And that was from Chris. Chris, I concur with you. I think that's one of the challenges about this move to professional judgment is we are moving away from the evidence-based kind of scoring maths to something that is a bit more interpretive. This is just a pilot. So this is a pilot. They're doing it with lots of services. Those reports will be published in the coming, hopefully, month or two, certainly this side of Christmas, or else there's no point if it's not actually accelerating things. So we will see kind of how the cookie crumbles. And we've got a couple of services that we work with that are in these pilots. So I'm sure perhaps in a few weeks' time or maybe a month's time, we will do a webinar with them to find out what it's been like to go through this new process and this new pilot. That's enough from me. I hope you're all well. Feel free to get in touch. I will hang around for a few more minutes if anyone wants to ask anything. In terms of webinars, we'll have something else probably the other side of the half term. Great to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope to speak with many of you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.
No worries. Thank you. If anyone does want to stay and have a chat and wants to talk about anything, I will be here for a few more minutes. So do feel free to stay. Again, not a requirement, of course. If anyone does want to raise anything, I'm happy to have a little catch up. I'll stop the recording as well.